In our last experiment, we discovered that water affects rocks by breaking them down into smaller pieces and moving those pieces downstream. Today, we are going to explore wind and see how different strengths of wind affect different objects. This activity will help us make some predictions, or hypotheses, about the relationship between wind, rocks, and sediment, which, if you remember from last week, sediment is dirt and sand. Before we dive into the activity, I want to read you a short book called What is a Scientist? Listen closely, as we are going to use these scientist skills to explore the effects of wind. What is a Scientist? By Barbara Lynn. A scientist is a person who asks questions and tries different ways to answer them. Hannah wonders about fruits and vegetables. Are there this many pea pods in every pea pod? Asks Hannah. A scientist learns from her senses. Cami and Tiara play with a mixture of water and cornstarch. They try to decide if it is liquid or solid. When I squeeze it, it feels like a solid, but it drips like a liquid, observes Tiara. A scientist notices details. Nate examines seeds inside vegetables. There are actually two kinds of seeds in the cucumber. The small ones are clear, discovers Nate. A scientist draws what she sees. Samantha shows how two liquids mix. The red drops beaded up inside the yellow liquid, observes Samantha. A scientist writes about what happens. Tim records his observation. The checker and pencil landed at the same time, but not the feather, writes Tim. A scientist makes comparisons by measuring. Amelia and Corey are measuring weights with the balance scale. Amelia, this side of the balance is higher because it is lighter, demonstrates Corey. A scientist must count exactly. Emily and Stuart count how many drops of water they can fit on a penny. We've put on 23 drops of water so far, says Emily. A scientist looks at objects carefully to decide how to sort. Zoe and her group organize the shoes and boots in different ways. You guys, I think this boot is longer, decides Zoe. A scientist designed experiments to test predictions. Jessie plants seeds at the top of one cup and the bottom of another. I think the seeds that I planted at the top will grow better than the ones at the bottom, predicts Jessie. A scientist experiments by trial and error. Nick uses a foam meat tray to make a flying object. I added a blob of clay and some paper clips on the front, and now my meat tray flies farther, explains Nick. A scientist thinks logically. Shivani explains how she learned about the compass directions. When I ride home at the end of the day, the sun is going down over there, so that must be west, figures Shivani. A scientist keeps trying over and over. Charlie and Stuart try to build a tower as tall as possible. Stuart, we finally got more than 10 to stay on, shouts Charlie. A scientist has fun. Jeff and Teresa experiment with water. Let's see if we can fill up the tube through these holes, suggests Jeff. A scientist is a person who asks questions, learns from her senses, notices details, draws, writes, measures, counts, sorts, tests predictions, experiments, thinks logically, keeps trying, and has fun. That's what a scientist is. Okay, let's get ready to put those scientist skills into action. First, let's make sure we have all of our materials. In your take-home kit, you should have 2 tools to help you make wind: a piece of paper and a straw. You also have 2 little puffballs, 2 rocks, one small and one a bit larger, and a reflective silver ribbon. First, let's pick up the paper. If you flop it back and forth, are you able to make the air move? You might be able to get a tiny bit of wind with this paper as it is. But to make it a tool for creating stronger wind, we're going to fold it into a fan. You can use the printed lines on the paper to help guide your folding. First, you will fold it forward on a line. You'll flip the paper over and fold it on the next line. And flip the paper over and fold it on the next line. And you'll continue that so every fold is in the opposite direction. Until you have an accordion stack. Once folded, you can hold one end, and if you want, you can tape it, or actually, let's fold it this way. You can either tape or paper clip this shut, or just hold it as is, and we can use it as a fan like this. Your other source of wind will be your own breath. You can create wind by blowing out air quickly from your mouth. And you can create wind by blowing through the straw that came in your take-home kit. Which of the 3 forms of wind, blowing air directly out of your mouth, blowing air through your straw, or flapping your fan, do you think will create the strongest wind? Now we're going to do some experimenting. Last week, we had very specific steps to complete for the experiment. Those were called the procedures. But this week, we're doing another kind of experiment, where you can explore the effect of each of these types of wind on your different objects in many different ways. You can do this on your own, or you can follow along and think about the questions that I'm asking about my objects. First, using just one type of wind, my fan, I'm going to figure out which of my objects are moved by the wind and which are not. And I'm going to try to find out which is the easiest to move with this gentle breeze of wind. What is your hypothesis, that's your prediction or guess, about what effect this wind from the fan will have on each of these items? Let's try it out. The ribbon. That one moves pretty easily. Let's try the puffballs. Moves a little bit. All right, I'm going to try my little rock. It's not moving at all. And my big rock. It's not moving at all either. When I used my fan, the silver ribbon moved very easily. The puffballs moved a little bit, but they didn't go far, and the rocks did not move. Did you get the same results in your experiment? Scientists complete experiments multiple times and share their results with other people who have completed the same experiment to see if their findings stay the same. You can repeat the same experiment using just your breath and then repeat it, creating gusts of wind with your straw. big rock still doesn't move. From this experiment, we can tell that some objects that are light, they don't weigh very much, move more easily and move more in response to the same kind of wind compared to objects that are heavier, such as my largest rock. The second experiment you can do is to compare the 3 different sources of wind with one object. In this video, I'll demonstrate with the puffballs, but you can do the same experiment with all the objects. I will create wind with my mouth, the straw, and the fan, and compare how these different sources of wind affect the puffball. From this experiment, we can see how very light breezes, such as that created with the fan, make these puffballs move just a tiny little bit, but they don't really travel anywhere. The stronger wind coming from my mouth and from the straw move the puffballs, and the wind from the straw is a lot narrower of a gust of wind, so it tends to only move one puffball, whichever one I'm directed at. Whereas blowing from my mouth, well, that time I just caught one, but it can be a slightly wider breeze. Based on what you found in this activity, what would you predict about the effect of wind on rocks? Take your fan, your straw, and the wind from your mouth outside to see how they affect sediment, dirt and sand, and rocks.